Welcome back to the lecture hall, everyone. Today, we're going to dissect an absolute masterclass in diplomacy, warfare, and, well, imperial expansion. We're going to look at the deeply calculated mechanisms that saw the Mediterranean shift from a totally stable, multipolar balance of power into absolute unipolar Roman hegemony. This isn't just ancient history. It's practically a foundational study in how superpowers operate. It's a story of political upheaval, shifting alliances, and brilliant military tactics that honestly still echo in our modern geopolitics. So let's just jump right in.
Here is our syllabus for today's explainer. We're covering 1. The Hellenistic balance, 2. The Trojan horse of friendship, 3. The phalanx meets the legion, 4. The Seleucid overreach, 5. The illusion of freedom, and finally, 6. Absolute Roman hegemony.
All right, starting with Section 1, the Hellenistic balance, or the three-legged stool of the Mediterranean.
To really wrap our heads around Rome's meteoric rise, we first have to understand the geopolitical status quo that they ended up completely disrupting. We need to look at the world of the late 3rd century BC, a world that Alexander the Great's successors had essentially carved up into massive competing kingdoms. Now, we throw the term hegemony around a lot in political science classes, but what happens when hegemony is entirely absent? Well, that's exactly the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean right before 200 BC. No single state had total control. Instead, they relied on this incredibly delicate, intricate system of checks and balances.
Think of the Eastern Mediterranean as being stabilized by a giant geopolitical three-legged stool made up of Hellenistic monarchies. You had Antigonid Macedon, Ptolemaic Egypt, and the massive Seleucid Empire. If one of these powers started getting a little too ambitious, the other two would just team up and act as a counterweight to protect the smaller states and maintain the status quo. It worked beautifully. But if one leg of that stool weakened, the whole system would topple. And that's exactly what went down in 205 BC. Egypt entered this brutal downward spiral, completely crippled by internal revolts and child rulers. It created a massive power vacuum, practically begging the other two powers, Philip V of Macedon and Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, to step in and carve it up. The balance was broken, for good.
Moving on to Section 2, the Trojan horse of friendship. Let's look at Roman diplomacy in the East.
So, Rome exploited this regional instability, and they started with something that seemed super peripheral at the time: Illyrian piracy in the Adriatic Sea. But here's the catch. When they sailed across, beat the pirates, and then went home, they didn't leave occupying armies behind. Nope. Instead, they left behind amicizia, Roman friendship. Now, that sounds nice and benign, right? But from a geopolitical perspective, this was a literal Trojan horse. In practice, being a friend of Rome meant you were an informal client state. You were slowly becoming subject to their ultimate authority. And you probably didn't even realize it yet.
Let's break down the Roman diplomatic playbook here, because honestly, it is a masterclass in tactical patience. Step 1, you just wait for smaller, weaker states to panic and ask for your help. When predators like Philip V and Antiochus III started bulldozing through the Aegean, smaller states practically begged the Romans to come in and protect them. Step 2, send an uncompromising diplomatic ultimatum. Rome would issue these demands they knew for a fact the enemy king would reject, which gave them the perfect moral justification to go to war. Step 3, defeat the enemy and declare the region free. And then, finally, Step 4, annex them the second they step out of line. Notice how Rome rarely framed itself as the bad guy. They were always just protecting their friends.
But we can't forget that Rome also had a remarkably long memory. Take a look at this timeline, specifically 215 BC. While Rome was literally fighting for its survival against Hannibal in Italy, they were suffering catastrophic, traumatizing defeats like Cannae. Philip V of Macedon made a fatal miscalculation. He signed a treaty with Hannibal. He kicked the Republic while it was down and threatened Italy itself. And let me tell you, Rome never forgot that. Decades later, once Carthage was finally out of the picture, the Senate used those pleas for help from the smaller Greek states as the ultimate excuse to unleash the full, terrifying wrath of the Roman war machine right onto Macedon.
Which brings us to Section 3, the phalanx meets the legion, a tactical paradigm shift.
The political clash was always going to happen, but the military clash between these two legendary systems of war, that would define the next 1,000 years. Picture this, the Battle of Cynoscephalae in 1970 BC. Two completely different philosophies of war colliding in the thick morning fog. On one side, you have the Alexandrian Phalanx, representing the rigid old world, this double-death wall of massive sarissa pikes that was literally a steamroller on flat ground. On the other side, representing the adoptable New World, you have the Roman legion, fighting in a flexible checkerboard formation with short swords. Because they were fighting on a sloping, uneven ridge, gaps naturally started opening up in that inflexible Macedonian pike wall. An unnamed, highly intuitive Roman tribune saw those gaps, peeled off 20 maniples, and flanked the phalanx from behind. The legion completely shattered the phalanx. The paradigm had officially shifted.
Right after this spectacular tactical victory, the Roman commander Flamininus steps up and masterfully plays the role of the great liberator. At the Isthmian Games, to a crowd that was just erupting in absolute jubilation, he declares the Greeks completely free, ungarrisoned, untaxed, and autonomous. Wow. It is a brilliant and honestly terrifying piece of psychological warfare. I mean, what better way to conquer a people than by convincing them you've just set them free? This intoxicating promise of absolute freedom perfectly masked Rome's growing, suffocating dominance.
Next up, Section 4, the Seleucid Overreach, or how Antiochus III stepped right into the trap.
As we all know, in geopolitics, nature abhors a vacuum. The severe weakening of Macedon immediately drew the eye of the largest empire of the era, the Seleucid Empire, led by Antiochus III. He figured he could just waltz in and replace Macedon, but he ended up walking directly into Rome's crosshairs. Antiochus actually tried to play the exact same liberator card that Rome had just used. So why did he fail? Well, as we've outlined here, Rome possessed vastly superior logistics and a deeply entrenched diplomatic network. Plus, local Greek cities didn't actually see Antiochus as a genuine liberator. To them, he was just a new master. And militarily, at Thermopylae and Magnesia, that flexible Roman legion once again completely outmaneuvered and outperformed the massive, cumbersome armies of the Seleucid king.
Let's get into Section 5, the illusion of freedom. The mask slips.
The absolutely crucial point you need to take away here is that the freedom Rome had promised the Greeks was entirely conditional. As long as you obeyed Roman foreign policy, sure, you were free, but the literal second you showed any independent ambition, you became a threat. King Perseus of Macedon tried to restore his nation's pride and peacefully build alliances, but this totally terrified Roman proxy states. Eumenes II of Pergamon rushed straight to the Roman Senate, and he cynically played right into their ancient trauma of Hannibal's invasion, warning them that Perseus was a threat to Italy itself. Rome didn't need much convincing at that point. They decided the only way to lock down their position in Greece was to ensure absolutely no equals were left standing.
And that tension finally erupted at the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC. What's truly staggering here is this number, 20,000. That is how many elite Antigonid soldiers lay dead on the field. The Roman legions, despite taking an initial, terrifying charge from the phalanx, once again exploited the uneven ground, slipped right past those pikes, and absolutely tore the Macedonian lines apart in close quarters. At Pydna, the Roman military definitively buried Alexander the Great's legacy forever.
But the thing is, Rome wasn't just interested in winning battles anymore. They wanted to instill an absolute, paralyzing fear. If 20,000 dead soldiers wasn't enough to send a message, try 150,000. To guarantee that no one in the region would ever dare to challenge them again, the Romans engaged in horrific punitive actions. They systematically destroyed 70 cities in Epirus, just because they had allied with Macedon, and sold a staggering 150,000 people into slavery. The so-called liberator had finally revealed its true face.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, Absolute Roman Hegemony, the destruction of the Old World.
By 146 BC, any lingering pretense of Roman friendship or liberation was completely gone. The mask was off, the gloves were off, it was time for the final brutal restructuring of the Mediterranean order. If we look at the fate of the Hellenistic states here, a chillingly efficient pattern really jumps out. Macedon, chopped up into 4 isolated republics and eventually annexed as a direct Roman province. The Aetolian League, stripped of its territory and totally banned from having an independent foreign policy. And the Achaean League, well, when they dared to rebel, Rome defeated them and completely razed the ancient city of Corinth to the ground. They killed the men, enslaved the women and children, and burned it to ash. Greek independence was permanently ended.
Listen, Rome didn't conquer this massive, sophisticated Mediterranean world just by using brute force. They utilized divide et impera, divide and conquer. They constantly allied with one minor Greek faction against a major one, turning Greek against Greek. They ensured that no unified resistance could ever form until it was way too late and Rome was ready to conquer them all. And honestly, this isn't just an ancient Roman tactic. Divide et impera is still a foundational strategy in modern geopolitics. We literally see echoes of this in proxy wars and superpower maneuverings today.
Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on for today's explainer. When an emerging power uses the language of friendship and liberation to systematically dismantle a multipolar world, at what point does the supposed liberator simply become the new tyrant? And really, if global stability is purchased with absolute subjugation, how long can that unipolar hegemony truly last before it starts fracturing from within? Thank you for joining me in the lecture hall today. Keep questioning history, and I'll see you in the next explainer.